call for aid. This is one of the most puzzling and scary things about the new NSPIRE protocol. Under the old UPCS system, the call for aid defect was worth about 1/10 of a point in a unit on a 100-unit property. To put this in better perspective, if every single unit was cited for a call for aid defect, the total value cumulatively would have been about 2 points. Compare this, for example, to loose toilet seats. If every unit on a property was cited for loose toilet seats, it would have come to about 16 points. It's about 0.8 of a point per unit. If we compare this to exposed wire hazards, which come in at about 1.6 points per unit on a 100-unit property, if every unit was cited, this would come to about 32 points out of 100. This changes drastically under NSPIRE. Call for aid defects go from being one of the very lowest scoring defects to one of the very highest scoring defects. If every single unit was cited for a call for aid deficiency 2, not a deficiency 1, call for aid deficiency 2 during an NSPIRE inspection, the scoring impact would be 60 points. Let me rephrase that. You can lose 60 points just on call for aid deficiencies. Let me rephrase that again. If the only thing cited during a REAC inspection was call for aids and it was in every single unit, nothing else was cited except for call for aids, you could have a final REAC score of 40. That's the scary part. What's the puzzling part aside from increasing the scoring impact of this deficiency by a factor of 24? REAC divided this into 2 defects, deficiency 1, deficiency 2. Deficiency 1 is non-scoring. Deficiency 2 is considered life-threatening. And on the typical 100-unit property, it will be worth 2.4 points per unit. Deficiency 1 occurs when a call for aid station is blocked, like maybe it's hidden behind resident-owned furniture, or when the pull string ends more than 6 inches from the floor. The longer definition tells us not to test personal, worn, wireless devices, and it tells us not to cite a defect when a call for aid station has a push button instead of a string. So, deficiency 1 is non-scoring. Apparently, REAC is backing off a bit, reasonably in my opinion, on holding management responsible for the placement of resident-owned furniture. Deficiency 2 is the killer in terms of scoring value. The short version simply says, the system does not function properly, but there's a lot to unpack there. The longer version of the definition is more specific. It says, a call for aid system does not emit sound or light or send a signal to the annunciator. The annunciator does not indicate the corresponding room. A pull cord is missing. A pull cord is tied up such that it cannot be engaged. Now, we believe the idea here is under tied up such that it cannot be engaged. We believe that the idea here is this should be cited if the string is tied up in such a way that when you pull it, you're just pulling, for example, on a towel bar because it's tied, and you're not activating the call for aid system. When they say a pull cord is missing, we think they mean the entire string is missing, not like just half of the string, like the string has been broken off and now it's been shortened. But we'll see how that gets interpreted in the long run. Additional notes tell us if the property has third-party documentation of a call for aids inspection, then the inspector does not need to test the call for aid stations. Now, it's interesting here that they've dropped the language that was in Compilation Bulletin 4, version 3, that mentioned systems designed for off-site notification and monitoring. In the past, they said if it was a system with off-site notification and monitoring that had a third-party inspection, you didn't need to test it. Now they're just saying if it's been tested by a third party and it's documented. I would warn all property staff to make sure to tell your REAC inspector if your call for aid system notifies an off-site monitoring surface. We don't want emergency services showing up unnecessarily. Fire trucks and EMTs with their sirens blaring. So this goes on to say, instead, this is when there's been a third-party inspection, the inspector should verify that the documentation addresses all parts of the call for aid system. In other words, the call station, the lights, the bells or alarms, the annunciator panel, all of the various components. Verify that the third-party documentation is dated within the last 12 months of the inspection date. There are additional notes that tell us if the call for aid system is abandoned. Do not evaluate call for aid systems if all pull stations have been removed and all that remains are indicator lights, audible indicators, or the annunciator panel. The primary consideration is that no part of the user interface remains. Now that seems to answer the old question that we heard over and over again. Can we take out the call for aid call station and put a blank plate over that so that there's no longer a user interface? And now I need to warn you, you may be violating a contract, you may be violating code if you do that. But in terms of the NSPIRE inspection, it sounds from this definition as if it's okay to take out the switches and install a blank cover plate. And again, an additional note says, if the call for aid system is a button-only device, do not record a deficiency for a missing pull cord. So this set of standards leaves us with a question or two on inspector interpretation. Deficiency 1 in effect says a string is short. Deficiency 2 in effect says a string is missing or a string is tied to something. What if a string, half of a string is missing, it's been shortened? What happens if a string is simply draped over a towel bar but not tied? We would argue that it's simply been shortened in relationship to the floor. You could still pull it and it would work probably, but it's not tied, it's not disabled. What if the string is wrapped around the towel bar once? What if it's wrapped around twice? Is that the same as tied? Furthermore, what if a string is simply tied up, like it's wadded in a ball and tied in knots, but it's not really attached to anything. It's just hanging, but it's tied, it's in a ball. It's wadded up. We would argue this doesn't make it impossible to activate the system by pulling on it. It simply shortens the string. So we hate to see the passing or failing of an inspection balance upon whether someone understands the difference between a string being tied in a ball or tied to an immovable object. Just food for thought. And this will be the kind of question that we're going to have to continue to ask REAC to clarify. We think in the early days of this inspection, there's going to be many definitions like this that cause confusion. And when you've got 60 points at stake over whether somebody understands the definition or not, that's pretty drastic. Anyway, this is Michael Gant for the Inspection Group, the REAC Guru. Thanks for listening.